Bernard Tobin here at the World Dairy Expo. Joined now by Brad Ingram. He's a hoof care specialist with Vettec Animal Health. Brad, how's it going?
It's going well, thank you. Happy Expo.
Brad, I want to talk a little bit about hoof care and health here. You mentioned, in your opening remarks that it really is an investment.
Right. When you look at the difference between, and we talked about it, investment and expense. An expense is, and I think I used actually some wording. An expense threshold rule is an expense is the economic portion of an asset that is used up within an accounting period. And we all know that's not a cow. A cow is an investment. A cow keeps paying you back. A cow is something that invests in you and you invest in your animal. So looking at it that way, I think is a lot healthier and a lot more successful for dairy farmers.
You mentioned, obviously trimming, balancing cattle, a real payback there. You've seen lameness in farms up, 60%, some of the cattle is lame at that level, costing up to 10% of milk yield.
Yeah, and more. There's so many studies done with different number results, but the only thing that is actually common in all those studies is that it does affect milk yield, and so proper hoof health care is going to increase your milk yield. And in this economy where a lot of people think we can cull the herd, or we don't, there's milk being dumped. We need every drop of milk that we can produce to be able to sell it. So that's kind of the way I look at it, and keeping, proper hoof care protocol will literally increase your dollars and cents at the end of the year.
One thing you talked a lot about here in your presentation was blocking, the importance of blocking, keeping cattle on their feet, keeping them moving. When you think about blocking, what type of challenges or injuries are we trying to tackle?
Well, you'll see there's a number of infectious and non-infectious hoof lesions, including white line disease and sole ulcers and toe ulcers. They're all probably going to be just as detrimental to the animal as the other, but blocking that non-affected claw and keeping that affected claw up, elevated, and not bearing any weight is really going to help keep that animal in motion and in production. So it's just important. One thing I didn't mention too that I wanted to mention is that there's a lack of communication sometimes between the hoof care professional, the herdsman, and even the veterinarian, and that's because everybody's so busy. But the most successful hoof care protocols and trimming operations I've seen will tell you that if they can communicate with the herdsman, the vet, sometimes even the nutritionist, it's just a successful partnership, and I really recommend it that at least once a quarter or once every half a year that you get together with those folks that you're working with on the dairies.
Let's talk about picking out blocks and deciding what to go with. You've talked rubber blocks, wood blocks, traction, a lot of things to think about.
Well, it's true, and some of it's preference, but some of it is, you look at most hoof trimmers and they have a plethora of things in their chute, and they look at the injury and they base the healing time, what they want to accomplish by what block that they're going to use. If they really feel confident that, I don't really need to check this animal again, I think it's going to be okay in 4 weeks or so, I'm just going to put an oak block on it and not going to have to worry about it. But if they want a longer, higher wearing block, I'm going to use one of the plastic or the rubber blocks. Some of the blocks, like the Vettec brand of blocks, has a really high traction level and a no slip, and that's really been kind of a popular block. But it just kind of is whatever you're seeing and being prepared for whatever the injury might be.
Hey, just want to finish things up here with some tips. You talked about, winter's coming.
Right.
There's some things we want to keep in mind, best practices for trimmers and when we're doing work with cattle on farm. First thing you pointed out was, store that blocking glue at room temperature. Make sure it's very workable.
Right, exactly. If you can store it, try not to leave it in your truck overnight. it's obviously going to work better for you. If you're, let's just say your son, and you're from Canada, you said, correct? Sure. So if your son or daughter broke their toy, you wouldn't go out in the middle of winter to try to glue it together in the driveway, right?
No, sir.
So you want to try to keep it at room temperature. 65 to 75 degrees is ideal. I know that's difficult. A lot of the trim chutes and a lot of the guys that go out there, I see them with some kind of apparatus, whether it's a cooler with a heating pad in it or something like that, just to keep the glue warm, and even the blocks, can be room temperature, but it does make a big difference. So even if you do accidentally freeze some glue, I just recommend that you thaw it naturally at room temperature. You don't try to heat it up, but room temperature is always the best.
Awesome. You also mentioned, hey, it is great to have a heat gun when applying blocks. Dry hoof is a lot better approach.
Yep, dry hoof, taking moisture out of the hoof makes a huge difference in success when you're blocking an animal, like I said, and even when that block does go on and you're waiting for that glue to dry, a little bit of heat from a heat gun can kind of make that assure that happens without any tackiness. And like I added before, it's sure nice to have a heat gun when your hands are freezing and you can put the heat gun in your block in your gloves for 30 seconds or so.
You also mentioned foot baths. Great to keep them going through the winter if possible. Foot sprays are an option.
Yeah, if you just don't have the option, or your foot bath is too close to the outside and you don't have a warm water receptacle near, try to do something. There are some sprays out there on the market that you can use, and a lot of guys will just use like an insecticide sprayer, and you go around and you hit the back of those feet a little bit and try to save the outbreak of digital dermatitis when spring does come.
Yeah. Hey, final message from you was clean, clean, clean.
Yeah, if you can, the drier you can keep things, the less chance a lot of those diseases and bacteria that stay in slurry and are produced from slurry and water. So if you can keep everything scraped and you can keep everything dry, it's always to your advantage. I know it's not fun. Like I said to some of the high schoolers that were here, it's not fun to go out there and scrape at 15 below weather in the middle of winter, but that's just the way it is, and it's part of the life. So,
Brad, hey, some great insights. Thanks for your time.
Hey, thank you very much. Have a good one, Bernard.